Okay, welcome back, everyone. We'll continue with the second part of the workshop, starting with question number 11. So, from which period does Trismegistos have the most authors? Since this is an author question, again, it's best to solve this question through our authors page. So if you go to authors, then, well, basically the only thing you have to do is look at the chart. And we've already taken a look at it when we were looking at the question for female authors. So like we said, well, the most of them are concentrated in the second and third, and well, let's say third to 6th century, mostly. So if we don't really know, which is probably in the majority of the cases, when someone was born or died, we give these approximate date ranges of 75 years, and this is to avoid peaks in the charts, because otherwise, if we would only date them, if, for example, there's a consensus that an author lived around, let's say, 425 BC, and we date them to 425 BC only, there would be this large peak in the graph, and so that's why we tried to spread them a bit with this date range. But so yeah, that was actually a very easy question. You just have to look at the chart, and then here below, as you know by now, is the list, in this case, of all authors in our database. I think the default sort order is chronologically. Oh no, not in this case. No, in this case it's the number of attestations. Yeah. So this table is sorted by number of attestations, but you can change the sort order by clicking on the arrows next to the column headers. So if you say, well, I want to see all authors sorted by date, you can just click on the arrows. It'll take a while, but yeah, here. And then you see a new order, and of course it starts with authors that are very, very, very broadly dated. Or at least some of them are very broadly dated. I don't really know, probably because we don't know when they lived. But so the oldest author we have is Anonymous of the teaching of Sheti. So he lived somewhere around 1950 to 1900 BC. And then for the Old Testament, well, it's considered an author. So that's our second one chronologically. But so you can also sort on language, for example, although I think the pie charts are more useful in that respect. Or the number of works they've written is also an option. So if you sort in the number of works, of course, the two Testaments pop up as the highest ranking ones. But then there's Plutarch with 144 works as the first real author. So yeah, so you can sort there. Here in, oh, sorry, I don't know what I did there. Oh, I went back to the default page. Okay. So yeah, that was question number 11, pretty short. Question number 12 then. Are 7th century Greek authors better attested in the papyrus tradition than in the pre-800 manuscripts that have come to us through the monastic tradition, and to what extent? So for this, we will need to use the authors page again. And first of all, we want to change the way dates, but I see that we forgot to add the BC in the question. So 7th century, or we can do it with 80 as well. Doesn't really matter. Okay, so let's say 7th century 80. So first of all, we need to adjust the chronological chart here. So for that, you can use the drop-down boxes. So first you change this to 7th century AD. you change the second drop down to 7th century AD as well, because you want to limit your search to that particular century. Oh, and then everything is Greek. Okay, no, so this question was apparently designed for 7th century BC, because otherwise it doesn't really make sense. Okay, so then we'll switch to the 7th century BC. So
must be AD.
No. If you look for AD, then everything is Greek, and then, well, also here, this doesn't really make sense. Huh. All authors are Greek. Okay, well then that kind of answers. So if you switch to the 7th century BC or to the 7th century AD, you will see that all authors wrote in Greek in these two centuries. For the 7th century BC, we have 26 results, 26 authors. But the second part of the question was actually, are they better attested in the papyrus tradition than in manuscripts? And for this, we need to look at the attestations, not the authors themselves. So again, here next to the results, the number of authors, you can click for the attestations. And then you see that there are 340 attestations by these authors from the 7th century BC. And then in the pie chart, you'll see that the large majority, some 94.5%, are actually written on papyrus. So yes, authors who lived in the 7th century BC are better attested on papyrus than through the monastic tradition. Question number 13. Does Trismegistos have any literary texts on papyrus from the early 4th century that are Christian, excluding Bible manuscripts? So for this, we need to go back to the Ldab, because this is not a question about authors, but about books. We're looking for literary texts. Now, like I said, you can interpret this two ways. You can interpret it in a broad sense, as in it's in Ldab, so I consider that literary. Or you can use it in a more restricted sense here in our culture category. In this case, we're just going to search in the whole Ldab, but if you want it to be more strict, you can enter literary or literature in the culture field. So we want literary texts on papyrus. So in the material search field, we'll add papyrus. And then we want the early 4th century AD this time, of course. Like I said, for the date, if you click on the info button, you get these suggestions on how you can enter dates. And we have, for these categories, early, beginning, middle, end. We already we include these options in our search criteria. So you can just add early 4th century, or you can, instead of writing 4th in full, you can also type 4th. That doesn't really matter. And then if we search for that, so you get the interpretation. So according to our standards, the early 4th century is AD 300 to AD 325. And it's written on papyrus, and it's included in the Ldab. You get 7 results for this. But the question was had a third variable, namely texts that are Christian. So for this, you need to specify a religion. Again, if you click on the info button, you get, oh no, that's culture. Oh no, it's religion, sorry. Here you get a list of all the possibilities that we have. Christian is among them, so if you click on Christian, it's filled in automatically. So if you search for this combination, you get search. You get one result. And that one result is here a Greek text found in Egypt from the 4th century. It's of Eusebius, the Vita Constantini. But there was an extra criterion, actually, namely excluding Bible manuscripts. And to add this criterion, you need to go to author and work. For Bible manuscripts, you can simply use the search term Bible, but we want to exclude the Bible manuscripts, so you have to use the Boolean operator not. So we write not Bible. And, well, since Eusebius isn't a Bible fragment, you still have the one text. Here you get, well, it's pretty superfluous, but you get the charts. You still get Eusebius here, a fragment found in the Fayum in Egypt. Now, about the date, we'll go back here. So like I said, this is interpreted as AD 300 to AD 325. And as you can see here, this is what we call a strict interpretation. This is the standard setting when you're looking for dates in Trismegistos. We use strict dates. And this means that the date range of the texts you are searching for has to fall completely between the dates you enter. So in this case, only texts of which the start date and the end date both fall within this date range are included for your search. So if you have a text, for example, that answers to the other criteria, but is dated to AD 305 to AD 330, it won't appear here because that's the 330, the end date of that text does not fall within this range. Sometimes you want this extra strict search, but maybe sometimes you want a less strict search. And for that, you can click on the plus sign here for alternative interpretations. In this case, what we mean by that is a not strict search. And if you pick not strict, which we'll do now, the search will include texts that only partially fall within this range. So if you have a text that is dated to 275 to 325, for example, if you pick the non-strict search, it will be included in your results. So in this case, instead of one result, we have 10 results here. You should be beware, though, that texts that are very, very broadly dated, for example, 800 BC to AD 800, which basically means we don't know when it's dated, even in a non-strict search, these texts are not included because, well, it's not very useful to include texts for which we don't really know the date if you're looking for particular dates, of course. I mean, if you're interested in the first half of the 4th century, you're generally not interested in texts that are dated to the entire Greco-Roman period, for example. So those texts are not included, but texts that more or less fall within the date range are. So you see that you have 9 extra results as opposed to the strict search. Now to know, because the date search can be pretty complicated, so we have more information if you hover over the question mark here. It gives some more information. So yeah, if you click on it, you go to the information page about our dating system in Trismegistos. Okay, so question number 14. Was the Codex format relatively more common as a proportion of all literary texts in certain regions of Egypt, and how does that compare to the roll format? So the first thing we have to look at is our text written on Codex. For that, we have a separate search field, book form. Again, click on the info button and you get a list of the book forms we use, which is fairly limited compared to other categories. So you can simply click on Codex. And if you search for Codex, you'll see that we have 6,176 results. Now, the question is, are they relatively more common as a proportion of all literary texts in certain regions of Egypt? So you want to get an idea of where in Egypt it was more common to write on Codex format. For this, we've designed a map to visualize things like this. And this is what you have here, show on a map of Egypt or the ancient world in general. Since the question is specifically about Egypt, we click on Egypt. And this opens up a new window with, as you can see, a map of Egypt with the various nomes of Egypt that are outlined. And the default setting is that you get a sort of heat map colored according to absolute figures. So you can see that in most parts of Egypt, Codex is, we have between 0 and 100 attestations of Codex, except for if we hover here or if we click here in the Hermopolites, there are some more results, the Oxydigites, and in the Fayum, the Arsinoites. So if you click on a nome, you get this pop-up with some more information. So you see that in the Fayum, we have 272 codices. Since these are absolute numbers, there's no proportion to show here, but these 272 codices from the Fayum represent almost 9% of all codices in Egypt. So you may have noticed that here in the results page, you see that we have 6,176 codices in total in Trismegistos. If you go to the map, you'll see that there are only 3,068. That's because this is a map of Egypt, and of course the results are automatically limited to Egypt. So in Egypt there are 3,068 codices, and 272 of them are from the Fayum, which is about 9% of all the codices from Egypt. But now the question is, you want to see, are they relatively more common? Relatively means percentages, so as a proportion of all literary texts in Egypt. And for that, you can switch to percentages mode here. If you do that, you'll see that everything is 100%, because here your search criteria are still both in the nominator and the denominator. So you're comparing codices in the Ldab to codices in the Ldab, which doesn't really make sense, of course. What we want to do is compare the number of codices to all texts in the Ldab, so all literary texts. So to do that, you need to remove the search criterion Codex from your denominator. You can do that by simply clicking on the garbage can, and then you get an overview of the proportional results in Egypt. And then you'll see that in the south and here, more or less Middle Egypt, codices are relatively more common than in the north. And again, you can click on the nome. So if we go to the Fayum again, we're speaking of 272 codices here, which is 21% of all literary texts in this nome. And again, 9% of all in entire province of Egypt. if we go to the south, we'll see that we have 13 codices from this region, which represents more than 75%. Of course, you need to be careful with these results because, for example, here in the Tenturites, these results are based on only 3 texts, which is not a lot, of course, and there are other regions. I'm going to try to find one. Well, 6 results, yeah. 1 here. If you go to the Eastern Desert, your result is based on 1 codex, which is not a lot. So we present the numbers to you, but if they are statistically relevant or not is something that you will have to interpret on the basis of the data that is given to you, of course. Maybe just a short note, yeah, here in the left bottom corner you see this weird shape. This is a miniature version of the province of Egypt, and this is where we group all documents for which we don't know the provenance. So the documents that have Egypt in general as provenance. So they're grouped here in that corner. So yeah, so you'll see that. So for the first part of the question, you see that to the very south of Egypt and here in the middle, right above the bend, the codex was relatively common. Now the second part of the question is, how does this compare to the roll format? And for that, we need to go back to the Ldab, and instead of looking for codex, we look for roll. So if you click on roll here in the overview and then search for roll, we'll see that we have a total of 5,523 book rolls in Trismegistos. Again, if you click on the map of Egypt, you'll see that for Egypt there are 4,453. Again, the absolute map is fairly empty except for the Oxyrhynchite nome and the Fayum. But if we switch back to percentages and we remove the roll from the denominator, we see that the roll format was actually relatively more common in the Delta, the Fayum, and the north here of Middle Egypt, actually. So there seems to be a pattern here. Again, if this actually means something or not, we can't tell you. That's up for you to interpret the results here. But it is interesting sometimes to see these kind of things on a map and to be able to play around with these numbers. Also, there's again, under the map, there's a large table listing each nome and the results for each nome here, so you can check there as well. Okay, so question number 15. Can you find miniature codices, and can you find miniature codices with Manichaean contents? This is a question that you can solve either in the central search or in the Ldab search form. So if you would look for this in the central search, you can actually just type in miniature codex, and I think Manichaean. And it takes a while. Yes. So then you'll see that, so like I said, this is not only the case for the Ldab search fields, but also for the central search field. If you combine different search terms and the denominator is, the operator is and, this is implied, so you don't have to type this, not in the central search field either. So you'll see here that religion is interpreted as Manichaean, the book format is interpreted as a miniature, as well as codex. And you'll see here that there are 4 results for this, yeah. And one of them is the the Mani Codex. Again, a text that features in our Trismegistos gallery. Question number 16. Can you find Syriac palimpsest texts dated between the 4th and the 7th century? When you're using dates, I always advise people to use the advanced search forms instead of the central search form. It handles dates easier. So in this case, you want Syriac texts. So for language, we'll go to, well, you don't need to scroll, you can type, but Syriac. Then the date is between the 4th and the 7th century. Like I said, here are some options for date ranges. Most of these are for precise years, but if you're searching for century ranges, this is basically the format we use. So BC 02 means 2nd century BC, AD 05 means 5th century AD. So in this case, we'd search for AD 04 until AD 07. And then we want palimpsest texts, and that is something that you need to search for in the reuse field. And again, if you click on the info button, you get some more information on the different keywords we use for to define reuse. So in this case, palimpsest, we simply click on palimpsest. And then if we search for this, we get nothing. That's strange. The date range was not interpreted correctly. Okay, maybe I should add spaces here. Yes, so now it does work. So as you can see, searching for dates is not always that easy. So if you use the century range, you should add spaces before and after the hyphen. And then you'll see that we get 61 results of Syriac palimpsest texts between these dates. They're all written on parchment. This is the chronological spread, and below here, again, you have a list of all these texts. Question number 17. Can you find manuscripts in the Irish Minuscule or Minuscule? So here we're looking for a specific language or script in this case. Actually, two different scripts because we consider Irish Minuscule to be something different than Irish Minuscule. Again, here you have the list of our options. So if you don't want to, no, it's not in here. I was going to say if you don't want to have any typos, you can use this, but in this case, Irish is not featured. Okay, so then we'll have to type. So we want Irish Minuscule or Minuscule. But so you use the or operator to combine these two. But it is important here that you add Irish a second time, because if you just type Minuscule, it won't know what to look for. The computer is very autistic when it comes to search terms, so you have to type Irish Minuscule or Irish Minuscule. And then you'll see that there are no results. And why is that? Okay, that's weird. But you can see here that the computer hasn't recognized the search terms, but he does know that we do have something that is pretty similar. So it suggests alternatives, and this can be pretty useful if you're not quite sure what you need to enter in a field. because if you hover over these words, he'll suggest alternatives. Now, in this case, they aren't correct, but because it combines both. But for example, if you hover over, okay, no, it doesn't interpret this one either. Okay, so we only have Old Irish. There seems to be something seems to have changed in the database. We recently started to split up the language and the script field because we noticed this is starting to give problems. Especially, for example, when you're working with Egyptian, well, you have hieroglyphic, hieratic, demotic. These are actually these are three scripts, but they all referred to the Egyptian language, and we used to combine this in a single field, so we're starting to split these up. So I'm under the impression that something went wrong here because of that. So it's not in the list anymore, so I think it's the result of splitting up the language and the script field. So at the moment, it is apparently not possible to answer this question, but it's something we'll be solving in the near future. And then you'll probably notice that in the future, language and script will be two different search fields. And so language will be strictly for languages, and script will be strictly for script. So I'm sorry about this, but yeah, we're always trying to improve the database. So sometimes things temporarily don't work. So we're going to have to skip question 17. Sorry. So question number 18. Are there any manuscripts from the monastery of Bobbio preserved outside of Italy? So for this question, you're looking for a modern place name where the text itself is preserved at the moment. And for this, you need to use the search field for library and oh no, sorry, it's not the place where the text is preserved. It's the place where the text was kept in antiquity or in the medieval times. So this is the field ancient or medieval library or archive. Again, if you click on the button, you get a list of possibilities, and since this is a monastery, I think we need to look for medieval libraries. Yes. Here we have Bobbio St. Columbanus Monastery, so if you click on that, it is filled in automatically, and if we search for that, we get 109 results. In fact, I think you can also just enter Bobbio in this. Oh, no. Let's just try. Yes, Bobbio. Oh no, Bobbio does not work yet. But if you hover over it, you get the last suggestion he gives is Bobbio, the Columbanus Monastery, so you can click on that, and then it gives you the correct results. But the question was, we want manuscripts from the Bobbio Monastery that are currently not preserved in Italy, so only those that are preserved outside of Italy. So for that, we need to go back. I'm going to put that here. And we need to use the field modern inventory. So this field is meant for looking for, the place where a text is preserved. And you can use inventory numbers for that, but you can also just use a country. If you want to exclude entire countries, you can do, or include entire countries, you can do that as well. So in this case, we don't want Italy as a location where these texts are currently preserved. So we type in not Italy, and then we get 4 results. 2 in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and 2 in Wolfenbüttel in the Herzog August Bibliothek. If you click on the 4 results, you'll see that these are all texts in Latin, all written on parchment. They were written in the 5th to 6th centuries, one apparently at the end of the 7th, beginning of the 8th century. So you have some more information there. For question 19, this is a longer question again. Are there literary manuscripts in Coptic with scientific contents, but excluding Bible texts, philological texts, writing exercises, or Christian texts, and not those dealing with medicine either? And after due consideration, we don't want the old Coptic ones as well. So there are quite a lot of search criteria in this question. So again, literary manuscripts, we're just going to assume all texts in the LDAB, so literary is implied since we're in the LDAB search form. And we want them in Coptic. So for that, for language, we fill in Coptic. We want the contents to be scientific. For this, you need the culture field, which is, like I said, the 4 broad categories we use for the LDAB. If you click on the info button, you get some more information about these categories. So literature, science, religion, and art. In this case, we want science because Coptic text with scientific contents. But there's a whole range of things we don't want these texts to be. First of all, or maybe we'll just have a look how many results you get first. If you want Coptic texts that are scientific in nature, you get 408 texts. But now, so there are a whole lot of things we don't want these texts to be. First of all, we don't want Bible texts. This means that in author and work, you have to specify not Bible. If we take a look at the results then, we get 361 texts, so already a bit less. Secondly, we don't want philological texts. For this, we need to search in genre. Like I said, we have a whole list of genres here. So we don't want philology here, so not philology. Again, if we search, we'll see that numbers drop a bit more, and we remain with 195 results. So a lot of them are apparently philological. Then the next one was we don't want writing exercises either. Again, this is a genre, so we add a second not criterion. And writing exercise, as you can see in the list, it's the last one in the list. It's also a genre, so we can click on it. And that leaves us with search. '59 texts. Okay, then the next one was we don't want any Christian texts either. So for that, we need to go to religion and say not Christian. Space here. And this long list leaves us with 45 results. Then it says, well, we also don't want those dealing with medicine. Now, the spelling error is deliberate, and it's to show you the hover function that I've already used before. So if we add not medicine, which normally is written medicine, first you'll get an error warning because so here you'll see writing exercise, Christian, philology, science, Coptic, Bible, LDAB. But then he says, oh, sorry, but this word medicine, I didn't really recognize it. But can perhaps suggest something similar. So if you hover over it, you will get medicine, which is the correct spelling. And if you click on this, this search term is added to your search, and you'll see that's now included. And this leaves us with 25 results. Then if we go back, first we're going to correct the spelling error. So the final part of the question is, after due consideration, we don't want Old Coptic either, which means we have to add an extra criterion for the language section. So we have to type Coptic, not, and then we have to look for, I hope it's in the list this time, Old Coptic. So we want Coptic texts, but not those that are Old Coptic. And this is our complete search. And this leaves us with 19 texts. 19 Coptic scientific documents that are not biblical, not philological, not writing exercises, not Christian, don't deal with medicine, and not written in Old Coptic. And you'll see then that most are written in Sahidic. Then there are others that are just Coptic in general. Here the dialect isn't specified. There are some bilingual texts, Coptic Greek. Some texts which we don't really know if they were written in Coptic or in Greek because the alphabet can be very similar. Again here. And there's one written in Bohairic. And we see that most of them were, papyrus or limestone. And then there's some pottery, some wood, and some parchment. And they're all pretty late, obviously. And again, here you have the list of the 19 texts. So that was a pretty extensive question. Then we'll go to the very last question. Is there a region for which the proportion of manuscripts of Augustine, as compared with all LDAB texts, is significantly greater than elsewhere? So although we're looking for a specific author, it's easier to do this through the LDAB page because, the question is asking for a proportion of manuscripts, and as we've seen before, it's easiest to do this on a map, and the map feature can only be accessed here, not through the author's page. So this is a question where you'd rather look up Augustine in the LDAB page than in the author page. So in the field ancient author, you can type Augustine, or you can also type Augustinus in the Latin version. It doesn't really matter. And you'll see that we have 163 texts answering to these criteria. Now, before we use the map of Egypt, but here this question is just a region in general, not Egypt. So then you can click on the ancient world in general, and then you can get a map of the Mediterranean and the countries here. By default, the map shows modern countries, but since we're talking about antiquity, we are generally more interested in the Mediterranean itself. So you can switch the map to Roman provinces here, if you like. Again, it starts out with absolute numbers, so you can see that most of the manuscripts containing Augustine are from France and Italy here. But again, we need percentages, which is more interesting, so we changed the mode to percentage mode. Again, everything is 100% now because the numerator and denominator are the same. So since we want to see manuscripts of Augustine compared to all texts in the LDAB, we need to remove Augustine from the denominator, and then we get this result. So we still see that in certain regions here in Middle Europe, they're relatively common. So here in the region Aemilia in Italy, there are 12 manuscripts. In Germania Superior, we have 29 manuscripts. The color is lighter, though, because proportionally there are less text here. So these 29 texts represent about 27% of all Ldab texts from Germania Superior, while in Aemilia, the 12 texts represent about 32% of all the Ldab texts from Aemilia. But in absolute figures, there are more in Germania Superior. But the region that really stands out is here, Africa Proconsularis. Even though there are only 4 texts from this region, or 4 manuscripts, proportionally it's colored dark red. Those of you who pay close attention will say, well, this doesn't really fit. I mean, how can they represent over 100% of the total? Well, that's because, I don't know if you can access them. Yeah, if you click on the 4 here, you go to the overview of these 4 texts, and you'll see that these are actually 4 the same texts. So they all have the same text ID, but they consist of different works. So there are 4 works of Augustine, but they are all on the same writing surface. So we have considered them as being one document, but they consist of 4 different works. So that explains why you have the strange statistics here. But it's interesting because he was actually born there, and so 4 of his works are preserved from that province. So that's how this map works, and then we've actually come to the end of the workshop. That was all the questions. So if anyone has any more questions or remarks or suggestions or whatever, I'd be very happy to hear them now. So yeah, if anyone wants to react.